Welcome to Action Hound Media, the site and channel all about action. Mike Spore, get some more action into your life. Today, we are going to talk about the UFC and its origin. The UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, originated in the early 1990s as a way to determine the most effective martial art in a real fight. So, the date it was founded was November 12th, 1993, and the location of the first event was in Denver, Colorado. The founders, you had this guy, Art Davie, who was an entrepreneur and marketer who envisioned a tournament to find the best martial art with the best martial artists. Also involved was Rorion Gracie, and we all know Rorion Gracie, don't we? He's a member of the legendary Gracie family from Brazil, who basically pioneered the art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or BJJ. Another person involved was this Hollywood director, screenwriter, John Milius. He's also a Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. He helped shape with the branding and the rules of the UFC. So the whole idea was to put different martial arts styles, boxing, karate, wrestling, BJJ, against each other in a no-holds-barred competition. A lot of you are familiar with the UFC and the rules, but I'm just going to go through them just so everybody knows. Basically, with the rounds for a non-title fight, it would be 3 rounds. A title fight or main event would be 5 rounds. Each round would be 5 minutes with a 1-minute rest in between rounds. That's a long round, 5 minutes, especially if you're up and down and grappling and kicking and boxing. You got to be in really good shape to even consider going into MMA. The weight classes were a little different from what we're used to. We're all familiar with the boxing weight classes, but the UFC kind of changed things, made a wider range of weights in their different categories, which did differ from boxing weight classes. Flyweights were 125 pounds, bantamweights are 135 pounds, featherweights 145 pounds, lightweights were 155 pounds, welterweights were 170 pounds, middleweights were 185 pounds, light heavyweights were 205 pounds, and heavyweights were 265 pounds. So way different from the boxing weight classes. So what's legal in the UFC? Well, fighters can use striking, punches, kicks, knees, and elbows. They're allowed to grapple, takedowns, throws. They're allowed to use submissions, chokes, joint locks. They're allowed to use a style of fighting which we like to call ground and pound. So that's when you get somebody down on the ground and you're striking them while they're on the ground. Some of the illegal moves in the UFC are no headbutting, no eye gouging, no hair pulling, no biting or spitting, no groin strikes, and you weren't allowed to kick or knee someone in the head who's a grounded opponent. So if they have like a hand or a knee on the ground, you're not allowed to kick them in the face. And there's no small joint manipulation like fingers and toes. You can't be breaking those digits. Of course, there's no attacking after the bell. You can't fake an injury. If the referee thinks you're faking an injury, you could be disqualified. In terms of judging and scoring, fights are scored using the 10-point must system, pretty much like boxing. Winner of the round gets 10 points. Loser gets 9 points or less. You could rule it a 10-8 round if it's a really dominant performance. And of course, you could also lose points, which could affect the judging in the round by doing any one of those illegal techniques. And the criteria is effective striking and grappling, octagon control, and aggressiveness. The ways you can win, of course, a KO, knockout. Basically, the opponent is rendered unconscious. There's also the TKO, a technical knockout, when the ref stops the fight due to unanswered strikes or inability to defend himself. So somebody who's getting hit repeatedly might be ruled out by TKO. There's also submission, so the guy getting submitted will tap out and automatically loses the fight. And of course, you could win by decision, meaning that you won more rounds based on the judging and the judges' scorecards. You could also lose by disqualification, which would probably entail repeated or egregious fouls. And the no contest would be the fight is stopped due to accidental illegal action like an eye poke. I've actually watched the UFC from the very beginning. I remember those days. It was quite different when it started than it is today. 8 guys competed and it would be single elimination, and they just keep fighting until you were down to 2 guys, and then they fought for the championship. There weren't any weight classes when it first started, and there were fewer rules. So it was very, very interesting watching the UFC back in the day when it first started. I mean, you could have like a sumo wrestler who was like 300 something pounds against a kickboxer who was like 180, which I think happened, and the sumo guy lost actually. I think most people are familiar with the outcomes of the early UFC fights. Jiu-Jitsu ruled. Royce Gracie was dominating everyone with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, there were no weight classes, so people were shocked when Royce Gracie was able to submit larger opponents or stronger opponents. If you ever seen Royce Gracie, he's like the skinny dude with the gi on, and he just went out, fought, and used the jiu-jitsu and beat everybody, which was really a defining moment in martial arts because we saw that jiu-jitsu was a very, very effective method to self-defense. Of course, a lot of people thought the UFC was very violent. Senator John McCain called it human cockfighting, and they were trying to ban it. But the UFC prevailed and stayed viable. So in 2001, brothers Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, along with Dana White, purchased the struggling UFC through their company Zuffa LLC for $2 million. And when they did that, they introduced weight classes, unified rules of MMA, regulation and sanctioning. And they also did a lot of marketing and branding, which included the Ultimate Fighter reality show in 2005, which helped save the UFC. Now we know that the UFC is booming, and for that $2 million, they're making way more now. Well, now we know that the UFC is the largest MMA promotion in the world with events across the globe. Anyway, that's how the UFC started. Pretty interesting. If you get a chance, you should go back and watch those early fights because it was insane. You'd have like a ninja guy against a Muay Thai guy. Royce Gracie really dominated everybody back then and showed that jiu-jitsu was a very, very competent and effective method of self-defense. Now it's evolved to the point where there's a lot more striking involved, and boxing is playing more of a role because if you could defend against the takedown and all the groundwork, you're okay if you could get back on your feet and, punch it out. And that's what people want to see. So it's still undergoing somewhat of a evolution. Anyway, that's all I could say for this week. Astronauts Unite. Peace.